and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your probably what are hectic days at home to spend some time with us and learn about building trust in a remote environment. So I am the Learning and Development Specialist here at Aidlight, and I've been managing remote teams for most of my 20-year career. So I'm excited to talk about things that I've found that have been successful ways to engage remote teams. So, ripped from the headlines, we know that remote workers are 13% more likely to plan to stay in their jobs than non-remote colleagues. 80% of employees, when comparing similar jobs, would turn down the one without flexibility. We know from research that remote workers report more productivity, more satisfaction, and it provides a competitive advantage to employers to offer this flexibility. So in this article, written in Forbes on May 30th, 2020, states this is why your employer still won't let you work from home, despite these facts. In the article, it says the reasons for not allowing remote work are lack of infrastructure, which I ponder a little bit. As I mentioned, I've been managing remotely for 20 years. In the start of my career, I was working with a 100-year-old company, and then I worked in nonprofits. So lack of infrastructure, really? Or lack of efficiency, but studies have shown remote workers in remote work can be much more efficient. And then lack of water cooler conversations. Again, a question mark for me, given the prevalence of tools like Slack or tools of Microsoft that allow some of this collaboration. So really, if you get down to it, this quote from way back in 2017 sums it up. So why didn't employers allow remote work? I feel like this is the most honest reason I've heard for why remote work has been discouraged. In an article congratulating IBM for making all of their folks come back to working in the office, way back in 2017 in Forbes, Louis Moscata said, you can't kick someone in the fanny when they've lost focus if they're working from home. Now, I don't know about all of you, but literally kicking someone in the fanny is probably a bad management strategy in general. Figuratively, I suppose once in a while you could do that from anywhere, but I think that there might be another way to go. So trust, right? What about trusting your employees? What about not defaulting to a lack of trust in times when they need to be kicked in the fanny? Or maybe even reframing that negative mindset and to think about coaching employees for ways that they can improve. I really believe that trust in one another is what will help us support our remote workforce. So let's dig in. So I'm going to take a quick poll here. This is an anonymous poll, and think about what you would answer. Should trust be earned over time or given immediately? So I'm going to launch this poll and just take a moment to share what you think. All right, we got 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. Oh, I guess we have 12 participants, so just a couple more seconds here. Okay, I'm going to share the results. All right, so 33% of you say earned over time, and 67% say given immediately. So now I'm going to close this. So I'm going to draw a line in the sand and say that giving trust at the outset of any relationship makes for relationships better and performance better. And And some of you may have experiences that have maybe led you to believe that having it earned over time is a better thing. I'm not going to disagree with individuals' experiences. Oh, and there's a comment here, maybe it's not binary because trust is built and can go away, which I think is a interesting point here. But even if you don't believe that it should be kind of given right away, we've got this thing happening, right? The global pandemic. It's turned our world upside down. And even if you're firmly in the earn my trust category, we're in this strange new world where we're stumbling through together, trying to figure out how to manage folks remotely if you hadn't been doing it, or perhaps you had been, but the dynamics have greatly changed. And perhaps you haven't had the time for your team to fully earn your trust, or maybe you haven't fully earned theirs. So today I'm hoping to share some tips on what we can do to build trusting relationships. We don't have much of a choice anyway, so isn't it better to start from a place where we're gonna assume positive best intent? And I think even if that isn't motivating, this is one of my favorite quotes I've seen during this time, which is, in a few years, I expect a lot of candidates will ask during the interview process, how did you or your organizations respond to the COVID crisis? And this is from Liz Bosland, head of content at Humu. So thinking about yourself as a manager, how do you want to respond in the future? Do you want to say that you created strong relationships that allowed people to thrive despite tough circumstances? Or maybe do you feel like you need to double down on your control? I'd encourage folks to think about how can we really build trust. So one quick note, I was so excited to get started. I didn't mention this. Certainly feel free to chat questions as we go. Nicole, as she mentioned, will be nudging me when they come along. So don't feel like you have to wait until the end, although we certainly will have time. Okay, so a little bit more about trust. So trust is a critical component to success. So research from Covey, Brene Brown, Jim Collins, Google, all point to trust as the main differentiator for performance at their organizations. The stats that are cited here are from Paul Zak, who is the founding director at the Center of Neuroeconomic Studies. And when compared to low trust organizations, people at high trust company report less stress, less burnout, more satisfaction, and more engagement at work. But the question is, how do you get there? How do you build that trust that's so needed to thrive in a remote environment, or frankly, just to thrive at all in the workplace? So I would love for everyone to take just a couple of minutes to, in the chat, identify behaviors that helped you build trust with colleagues back in what we're jokingly referring to here as the before times. So back when you were maybe face-to-face with your colleagues. What are some behaviors that helped you build trust with a colleague? Mm-hmm. Regular communication, getting a drink after work. Observable good performance, yep. Building rapport. Yep. Great. Everyone some moments to get some final thoughts in here. Yep. See lots of +1 for pairing. So it sounds like we've got a good developer crowd out here, which is excellent. having lunch together, eating together, drinking together, pictures of pets and their kids, constructive criticism, coffee. One of the ones that I missed here was sharing uncertainty, vulnerability, and fallibility, which, you know, I think in this time right now, a lot of those things are just right out for everyone to see. In fact, I just heard my daughter yell in the background about something, right? So those vulnerabilities in our own environment are certainly at play here too. Finding common interests, hopes, and fears. So all of these, right, like all of these speak to this human connection that we can bring to the table, the ways in which we can connect with one another, the ways that we can, in person, right, make these connections. And the challenge now is to figure out, well, how can we do these things virtually? And what's really exciting about most of these is I've seen just in our own organization here at Eighth Light, but also before when working with teams that were distributed or were fully remote, people coming up with creative solutions like virtual coffees and virtual happy hours as ways to build strong relationships and build trust over time. It's just now, right, instead of photos of pets and kids, they wander in and you get to meet them in person in the current remote environment that we're in. So these are all great ways in which to think about things that we can be doing to build trust. And we'll talk about many of these things and how to translate them into an online environment, into a virtual environment. All right, so these are the three areas that we're going to focus on today for trust building behaviors. These are not the only ways to build trust, but these are some of the things that I think are most important when working remotely. So the first one is respecting boundaries. So, and in respecting boundaries, there are three things I encourage folks to think about. First, take care of yourself. Second, take care of and care about your people. And third, setting boundaries together. So this first section is really about taking care of yourself. Liz Fosslin was on a roll, so I quoted her again here. If you get overly anxious, you're going to start furiously sending emails at night. That's when you really stress out about your direct reports because that's when you really stress out your direct reports because they're going to feel obligated to respond right away, and then their stress ripples throughout the company. I wonder how many of us have been on the receiving end of those emails, right? So when you get an email or a late night Slack and you feel like obliged to respond. As managers, it's our job to keep our folks motivated and engaged, but if you're stressed, your people will be stressed too. So if you attended our training last month on remote work, you know that at Eighth Light, we use an emotional intelligence framework when training our folks here, and particularly our managers. And our series spends about a third of our time on management, on focusing on your own self-awareness. So the ability to recognize our own attitudes, moods, beliefs, and self-management, our ability to control their impact on others. So I mentioned this last time, and I'm mentioning it again because I think it's an important tool for any individual, but especially for managers and the people they manage. Really getting crisp about what is your daily routine? What do you need to do to be successful for yourself? How can you manage your stress load? Filling out this kind of questionnaire and encouraging your direct reports to do the same will help you understand your needs and those needs of your team as well. And if you aren't getting what you need and you aren't setting yourself up for success, you're not going to be able to make good decisions on behalf of your people. So really knowing what it is that makes you tick and how you can manage the stress that's happening right now is really important. So then setting boundaries together, and I realized that I skipped caring about your people, but we actually cover that in another section today. Setting boundaries together, your shared expectations, right? So thinking about creating a shared document that you can use to understand how you can work together. I used to recommend that managers create a quick user's guide to themselves and hand it out to their employees so that the employee really knows who they are and what they care about. But I realized that I think that's a little bit self-centered. Rather, it's important to create a shared expectations together about how you're going to work. And it's different than setting goals that we'll talk about later, but it's really about coming up with norms about how you work together to form boundaries, particularly in a time when working remotely, you could be working 24 hours a day if you don't have the right boundaries set. So thinking about what work can be done flexibly outside of typical hours. When will the two of you be able to collaborate and how? What tools will you use? How much work can be done async? I'm a big believer in asynchronous work and thinking about how we can set folks up to have more time to think deeply. What constraints do you have? What constraints does your direct report have? So is nap time 2 to 4? So it's really important to have no meetings at that time because you can get a lot of work done in that time. Or maybe it's something similar for your direct reports. Are there any sort of expectations about outside hours? Expectations for videos and how to ask for help. So thinking about what that might be. And in particular with video, setting an expectation about it being okay not to be on video if that's something that, that your direct reports don't feel comfortable with. So these are some ideas about setting some shared expectations that, that we all can, that you and your direct report can agree to. And I feel like everyone likes a do and don't list. So here's some don'ts. Don't insist on your teams being on an open Zoom all day long. And just a note, these two are ripped from the headlines. These are some suggestions that I have seen that I think aren't so great for how to manage remote work. So don't insist on your teams being on an open Zoom all day. Some teams may set up open Zooms and want to collaborate in that way, but if you're just checking in on people and making sure they're sitting at their desk, not a great look. Don't monitor when direct reports log in and out on tools. And don't expect instantaneous responses to your requests. Have generous expectations about responsiveness. So most things aren't true emergencies. I had a former boss who said, I used to work at an organization that provided services to emergency services to the homeless. So my bar for what is a true emergency is very, very high, right? Life and death situations. I also had a former direct report who used to say, the rule I apply is the same rule I apply to my kids. Unless someone is bleeding from the head, everything's fine and I can handle it. So don't expect me to reach out, or I don't want to, you can expect me to only reach out only in times of, of emergency. If I'm reaching out to you after work, they are going to, she knows that that's something that I don't need to respond to right away. I once had a coworker who got mad at me for missing a Slack message. Yeah, that's kind of what Slack is for, right? Async communication, right? I think that setting really clear expectations with folks about what you might do and what you think are the right ways to communicate and coming to that shared agreement are really important to ensuring success. Also including your new coworkers, like my little one sneaking in and out in those agreements might help too. So the do's, right? Make time for self-care, encourage direct reports to do the same. Block off your time on your calendar for getting work done and encourage your directs to do the same. And set generous expectations about responsiveness, as I mentioned. All right, so the next section is about setting clear expectations. So, are you a dreaded micromanager? So are you someone who always has to have your eye on someone, be essentially in their laps, ensuring that they're getting their work done, hands-on keys? You're likely hyper-focused on your employees getting work done. You likely tell folks exactly what needs to get done. And I'm wondering for folks who are like this, how's that working for you right now? How sustainable does it feel? As a former micromanager and someone who actively works to not do that, it's really exhausting when you have to try and manage every single detail. Or perhaps you're more of a social butterfly, right? You thrive by building lots and lots of relationships. Maybe you fly by to get the latest scoop on what's happening with them personally. And this too can be really tough to do right now. You just can't quickly pop into someone's office and check how they're doing. And you know, for some people, that drive-by could also be distracting. So we really need a middle ground that helps all managers accomplish their goals. So you've probably heard this proverb before, trust but verify. So this is an old Russian proverb. A new 8th Light proverb is trust and set clear expectations. By setting clear expectations, it allows you to be more hands-off and get information as you need it. So, so in setting clear expectations, it's important to set measurable goals, rely on self-service progress tracking, and recognize the impact of your people. So considering that we are in the middle of a big disruption, perhaps this is a chance for a reboot in your expectations about what's really important. And maybe it's critical to have a conversation about what you really and truly need your teams to accomplish. So have a reboot and consider taking a first pass by yourself. So setting measurable goals could be doing something like this. And I'll encourage all of you actually to try this exercise right now. So, you know, jot down to yourself, you don't have to put this in chat. This is something you can do on your own. What do you need your direct reports to accomplish? What do you need them to do daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly? And we'll just take a couple of minutes to reflect on this. So if you take a look at where you started, that can be really interesting. So it might tell you something about how you think as a manager. So if you're starting with the day-to-day tasks, do you really struggle with like painting the bigger picture for your employees and what they need to do? If you started with the year, do you have trouble breaking things down into measurable chunks? In either case, it might be useful to work with someone else on your team who can help complement your strengths and weaknesses. But the other question that's really important is, Also, like, what do you really need? If your answer is, well, I actually need to know what's happening on an hourly basis, I hope that means it's because you're a manager on a call center on a lookout for trends over time, not because you're expecting folks to report in that frequently. It's a recipe for burnout. At the same time, if you check in on things too infrequently, you can allow things to get off the rail. So really figuring out the right frequency to check in, the right frequency to set goals at is really critical. And then I think the other piece that folks often miss is the why, right? So why do they need to accomplish these things? How do you tie goals back to what will help them accomplish business goals? Like, that's really great for people to see the direct line of sight into work that they're doing and how that impacts their clients or impacts the company. If even better, can you take it a level deeper? What will it help them accomplish personally? If you know what they care about, what keeps them motivated, especially during this tough time during the pandemic, making those connections can be really exciting and helpful. And so I think it's important to get to know the human behind your direct report and understand what keeps them going. And I've found that, you know, even when folks are remote, they need to be self-directed. And so having ownership over goals and that sense of purpose is critical. The next tip is just relying on self-service progress tracking. So how do you get the information you need and how can you get it without bugging your people? This is another favorite management quote I found in my research. The worst micromanagers are the ones that ask for information that they can get themselves. I know I always disliked this when I was reporting to people. Being disrupted in the day-to-day work, being disrupted from getting the work done can be really frustrating. So trying to think about ways that you can have status reports, so versioning control, ticketing systems, storyboards, status spreadsheets that are simple, built into the workflow, and easy to update so that you as a manager can go and get that information for yourself, get it very easily, and then come prepared to discuss the results and the impact during one-on-one. So you don't have to wait till your employee updates you on what's happening. What can you create that allows you to see progress for them? And the emphasis on not interrupting the day-to-day work for those who work for you is about giving them the space that they need to do important work that needs to get done, giving them the freedom to plan and manage their days in the ways that make the most sense for them. So coding is deep work and requires concentration and attention to detail, as I think many of you know. The same can be said for untangling a spreadsheet, designing a creative piece. It all takes dedicated time and attention. And when interrupted, studies show it takes 16 minutes to get back on track. On top of all of this, when we are remote in this particular time, we might have distracted days with pets and homeschooling and roommates and others in our space. So figuring out how your employees can make the space for themselves to do their most productive work is really critical. Another point is recognizing the impact, right, as a way to really do a great job of setting clear expectations. So when appropriate, use channels to publicly recognize your employees for the work that they do, and let them know that they're doing a good job. You're not going to be able to see them to give them a pat on the back, right, and say, okay, congratulations for the great job that you did. So I will say where appropriate, knowing that not everyone likes to be recognized, in public, but the advantage when you can is, sending out an email recognizing great work can also reinforce for others in your organization what expectations are and what you can do to really excel. And when doing so, it's really important, as with all feedback, focusing on the situation, the behavior, and the impact. So, here's an example. Sally went above and beyond to deliver a great proposal to her client. We won the business. That would be a lovely note to send. But if you can get more specific, it talks about the things that Sally did that were great, but also what you appreciate specifically and what you expect. So Sally's client had a last-minute proposal request. Sally worked with me to prioritize this proposal over her other projects, and her laser focus on this highest priority project resulted us winning the business. So what this says is not that Sally worked a bunch of extra hours to get this done, was that Sally prioritized her time. She worked closely with you to get the work done, and she focused in on the right things. That's a message about time management. It's a message about prioritization. It's a message about communication and how this particular employee did a really great job in figuring out how to focus time. So more do's and don'ts. So don't have a hidden agenda. Make sure you're really clear about what your expectations are. Don't use different metrics and reports to evaluate your employees. Agree on what the metrics you're going to use are and use the same data that your employees can see. Don't make updating you hard. Try and think about simple ways to make updates. And don't praise hours worked. Praise the impact that the work has. If you praise hours worked, it ends up perpetuating this idea of you have to work long hours to get ahead or be successful. And that might be true at your organization, but it's also a little bit of a recipe for burnout. So what you can do is be clear about what you expect from people and by when. Give people the time that they need for deep work. Ensure progress tracking tools are easy to use. If you don't have tools, ask your team for ideas because you probably have some great ones. And then use that SBI framework to acknowledge great work. And finally, creating belonging. So this is where I talk about caring about your people, communicating intentionally, and creating shared experiences. So to have a good relationship, you have to be able to bring your whole self and care about each of the people who work with you as a human being. So it's really critical to care about your people to be successful and get to know their true hopes and fears. Let them know your hopes and fears, as someone mentioned in the chat. And this goes a long way to building trust with them. This is a tweet from one of our amazing designers. Eva has just been assigned a new manager who went through our training series here at 8th Light. So of course I'm going to take credit for this. And he asked her this one powerful question. And so she was so excited, she tweeted it out. My new manager immediately won me over by starting off our first one-on-one with, how are you doing? I mean, how are you doing as a human right now? So we all know that the pandemic is overwhelming. And we also know that even in the before times, we need to be making it, and we need to make time for people as humans. So it could be asking how your folks are doing. It could be greeting your new extended coworkers, your direct reports, kids and plants and pets and partners and roommates that all show up in your video conference. It tells them that you care about them as a human and you recognize that they have a ton going on right now. and it's showing that you recognize what they're doing to make life work. It's also a great time to thank them as well. With communicating intentionally, it's important to really reflect on the individual needs of your direct reports. Some people really like frequent outreach, just saying hi. They, are really looking for someone to reach out very frequently. Other folks don't need that, but it's important to know who you have and if that has changed since we've all moved to remote work. I've seen suggestions about communicating twice as much as you think you need to when working in this environment. And so think about what that might mean for you. I think when I think of over communicating, I think it's also a good thing to think about different types of things that need over communication. And so things that might need over communication are things like organizational wide messaging. So let's say HR sends out a mass email and it has some important tips about benefits. A lot of times those emails don't get read and people miss important information. So as a manager, you could highlight some of the things you thought were interesting to encourage people to read a little bit more deeply and see what they need to do. Or, it could be about reinforcing just general messaging from the organization about strategy or expectations, just because it's been put out once, particularly if it's been put out from headquarters or the corporate office. Sometimes you have to reinforce things over and over again before it really resonates with folks. It's not because they aren't listening, it's just how humans are wired. And then spending time on writing and tone in a remote environment is really critical as well. So make sure you're clear about what you want to communicate when you're writing. If you're moving towards more async communication, that's going to be important. We talked a little bit last time about cultural references, using emojis to help soften things or express emotion. Also, a tip I came across recently was rereading your messages. And if you reread it and you say, gosh, I don't know if I came across right, just ask the question. Here's how I intended to come across. I may have missed the mark. Please give me feedback. So being self-aware of how you can communicate more clearly and intentionally with your folks. And then creating shared experiences. So moving important traditions online and engaging your team to cultivate new experiences. So at 8th Light, in some of our smaller offices, folks would arrive and give fist bumps to everybody who is in the office. Obviously, that tradition has gone away, but what folks are doing instead is they have virtual fist bumps where they all jump into their office channel and give each other high fives. Our Friday stand-ups and lunch still happen. They happen online. It's still a great way for us to connect organizationally. And we've come up with new experiences as well. And these could be used organizationally or they can be used as an individual. So one of my favorite things that have come up is questions of the day. So we have a water cooler at 8th Light. We just talk about things that are going on or interesting questions like, what's the best book you've been reading? What would be your theme song? The most popular one was, what were you like when you were 16? Feel free to share pictures. Can't imagine how many pictures we saw of some really bad 80s hair, mine included. So things like this can really pull you together despite being far away. And I've got a colleague on here who doesn't know I'm doing this, but also you can learn about interesting things in the organization as well. We have a culture and experiences or a culture and communications group. And one of the aha moments that the group had was, we have a lot of foodies and travelers at Eighth Light. We cannot share our food and experiences with one another now, but let's do it virtual. So I learned a ton of stuff, I think it was last week, about borscht from Olga. So did you know that every family in Ukraine has their own borscht recipe? And there's a competition for families within families on whose is the best. But I know who Olga's thinks in her family, whose is the best, but I'm not going to say it. And there's also a borscht belt in Eastern Europe. I learned so many interesting things from my colleague, and it was fascinating. So we do things like that because it's a part of our culture. It's easy to do, doesn't take a lot of time, and can be a great way to connect. We also have started virtual game nights, virtual happy hours, and lots of different ways to create communities across teams. So thinking about how you can tap the creativity of your team to encourage belonging. Ron's team does the chicken dance. Sounds like a great way to blow off steam. I went to an improv class once where we did the chicken dance as like part of the ritual of the experience, and it was a ton of fun. So do's and don'ts. So don't ever assume an organization-wide message is clearly received. Think about it as your responsibility as a manager in a remote environment to really follow up and make sure that folks understand. Don't assume shared experiences will happen organically. We created a small group that intentionally created shared experiences, and some things did happen organically as well. Plan for a mix of both. Don't feel like you have to create culture on your own as a manager. Think about my do is engaging others. And then don't have a one-size-fits-all communication with individuals. So do communication, customize your communication plan for individuals, rework your in-person customs for an online environment, and engage your team to come up with ideas. Of course, always making participation optional. So ultimately, by doing these things, you can really earn the trust of your people. And of course, we couldn't get through all the tips and tricks that you need to be a strong remote manager in a 40 to 50-minute session. So we do have remote manager training available to folks if they're interested. This is a 10-week program designed to really build community, break down barriers, and create an inclusive space for folks in a remote environment.